Hey, what is up, everybody? Platform Disciple here, and today I'm going to be bringing you the first video in a new series I would like to do. Of course, I don't know how frequently I'll be producing episodes of this series, but we got to start somewhere. And the purpose of this series is to identify an existing Infinity Wars card that could benefit from a change. And the goal of this series is going to be focusing on cards that are underutilized or are underpowered, maybe even boring, and trying to spice them up a bit, give them a bit of a facelift to help them see the light of day. There's a lot of cards I have in mind on this, but with a previous video I talked about unlimited characters. And one of the unlimited characters I talked about was Survival Swarmer, which I'm going to bring up for a second here. It's not much to look at, but one thing I pointed out is that the Swarmers are quite weak. And thinking about this card, I was thinking, well, the Swarmers are quite weak, and this is a core card of theirs. Buffing this card might help. However, Dravoid, if I'm getting your username, if I'm pronouncing that the way you have envisioned it, pointed out that one of the things that could be exciting about Swarmers if they weren't so bad is that they all synergize with each other. And for that reason, this Survival Swarmer is kind of the building block piece to absorb all of the synergies, and that the problems that the Swarmers face are really kind of coming from the other cards, or at least that solving the problem in a way that keeps the Swarmers interesting and unique is not done on this card. Instead, the card that I want to talk about, and this is also a card I want to talk about because I've seen some other people talking about it recently on the Discord, is Swarmer Broodlord. The reason I want to talk about this card is because if you are going to change one Swarmer and make Swarmers more exciting, this is the one to change. And I want to begin by kind of looking at how this card is right now. So for starters, it takes up a command zone slot, and if you want to play the proper Swarmers deck that has access to all of the different insectoid characters, you have to use that slot. In Infinity Wars, the command zone slot is extremely powerful and important. Using that on an efficient character that has abilities that you can use from the command zone, or a character that has a high impact when you drop it right onto the battlefield, offers you a lot in terms of how your game plays. That is not what Swarmer Broodlord is. Swarmer Broodlord is a 4-cost 8/8, so it has worse stats than a 3-cost character. So it is worse than a vanilla character that is 1 cost less. That's 12 morale cost, which is also noteworthy because it's a drawback. And then it is factionless, which means that by having it in the command zone, you reduce the number of cards that you have access to, potentially very powerful ability cards, and staple characters. And in addition to that, you can only include insectoid characters in your deck. And only including insect characters in your deck could be an exciting thing if it weren't for the fact that your insectoid characters that you're looking at, like your payoff, the upside to this card is that you can include Tranquil Swarmer in your deck without being in Descendants of the Dragons. And the reality is most of the Swarmers are quite weak, so your payoff is very low. As a matter of fact, I think most of the Swarmers could use a facelift, but I really want to focus on the Swarmer Broodlord. But I do want to mention just one other Swarmer here. If I can find it real quick. Here we go. And that is Caretaker of the Swarm. I just want to throw out there, if you want to do something for the Swarmers, giving this character one more health to take it outside of Lightning Blast and Yuanchi's Wrath range would be greatly appreciated. And I don't think anyone is going to complain about that because of how weak Swarmers are. I think taking this card outside of Lightning Blast and Yuanchi's Wrath range is a really easy, quick change. Like, you're just changing one number, and I suspect that most people are going to agree that that would just be a nice change, because it might make this card a little more palatable. Last thought I want to make about the Swarmers before we jump into kind of like solutions here is that the most alarming thing about the current version of Swarmer Broodlord is that it is so weak that I believe that the best Swarmer deck doesn't use this as the commander. The good Swarmer cards are, or the ones that you really care about are this guy, Brutal Swarmer. You also care about Unending Swarmer. This one is probably kind of the best Swarmer that in a vacuum, because it's potentially a 4-cost 8/8 plus a 3/3, which actually is reasonably good for a 4-cost card without having to bend over backwards. Most of the Swarmers you have to bend over backwards just to like break even, but this one breaks even pretty quickly. And I'm gonna reference Red Blade. Everybody's probably seen Red Blade online. I've seen Red Blade play with this Artificial Swarmer and the other two that I just brought up in the command zone, and that seems to perform better than a lot of other Swarmer lists I've seen, and I think the reason for that is just because you get to have 3 actual commanders, and you also get to have 3 factions worth of abilities to tap into instead of just 2 pips of purity, because that sacrificing that 1 purity to the faction list is just brutal. Okay, so anyways, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I think most people are in agreement that the Swarmers are quite weak, and I think most people are probably in agreement that Swarmer Broodlord in particular is exceptionally weak and is part of what drives the Swarmers to be as weak as they are. I think that even if you buff this card, they might still have a lot of problems, but you would at least be able to not feel like you have a vanilla 8/8 in your command zone that has 12 morale cost and costs 4. Because you do. That is what you have in the command zone if you're playing the Swarmer deck, and that is worse than most draft cards. It's worse than I talked in the previous video about One of Many. It's worse than One of Many. One of Many has better stats, costs 1 less, has 8 morale lower. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. So the pitch for this series is that I look at a card, and then I share with you 3 redesigns. And one is a conservative redesign that is mostly focused on changing very small things about the card. Could be stats, cost, things like that. And one of the elements that is going with conservative, moderate, and radical, which is the 3 ranks that I'm giving these redesigns, is it's not just how dramatic the redesign is, it's also me keeping in mind how easy would this be to implement from a coding perspective. I do not know what the Infinity Wars code looks like, but I suspect that changing a character's attack and health is really, really easy. But changing how a character's ability works might be very hard, depending on that ability. It could be very demanding. So the idea is to try to keep all of the designs as ones that are approachable, because I'm kind of hoping that these get seen and maybe even implemented. But I'm also hoping to present a variety of options so that the community can say, hey, I don't want to see a radical change, or maybe they do want to see a radical change. And then the developers might be able to say, this change is one that's easier to implement, and we like that. Okay, so let's talk about our changes here. And we're going to start, of course, with the conservative change. And the conservative change is first to give Swarmer Broodlord an additional 6 health. And that is going to take Swarmer Broodlord and put it in line with Draft Chaff, which is an improvement from where it's at. So the card that we can reference here is Brown Bear. So, and what I am proposing is an 814, Brown Bear is a 913, and I'm willing to bet you didn't know that Brown Bear had an alt art. While we're on this subject, it's very confusing why you would commission art for cards that don't get seen. I think this is really cool art, but I have never played with this card, and even in Rift Run, it's not going to be a frequent pick for me. That's besides the point. The point I am making is that changing Swarmer Broodlord to an 814 is very conservative. Nobody should be complaining about this. You've never ever seen Brown Bear in a real game, so seeing a Brown Bear in your opponent's command zone that is also an insectoid shouldn't bother you. That should be a change that everybody's willing to accept. Also bundled in with the conservative change here, and I'm going to bring it up on screen now, is I really think that Swarmer Broodlord shouldn't be factionless anymore. I think that we have some use cases or some case studies in something like Beck, where I think that adding a hybrid symbol, first of all, is not unfair, given how weak the swarmers are. Adding that hybrid symbol will allow the swarmers to tap into deeper synergies in the two factions that I've put on there. And I think Beck is a really cool card, and I think part of what makes Beck a cool card is that it has that hybrid pip and isn't factionless. I think Beck would be a lot less cool if it was factionless, and I think Swarmer Broodlord would be a lot more cool if it had that faction pip. The objection that you could have to this is that it does allow the swarmers to potentially go into like triple Warpath or triple Sleepers. And I do just want to quickly justify the reason we've chosen Warpath and Sleepers as the two factions for Swarmer Broodlord to be able to choose from are most of the Swarmer cards. The only faction that has multiple Swarmers is Warpath. And then as far as the insectoids in general go, the Sleepers recently added some insectoids, insectoids. So we have Apothena's Bloodfi, for example. So I think there's a pretty compelling argument to make that Swarmer Broodlord, if it's going to have a hybrid pip, it should be Sleeper's Warpath. That's my opinion. You're welcome to object, but I really think that adding that would do a whole lot for Sleepers. Like, And I think that's a conservative change. I think those are easy to implement, and I think they would massively change how you could play the Swarmers. You could use triple Sleepers cards, which gives you access to things like Undeath Witch, which is a fantastic card. But because the Swarmer Broodlord has that built-in restriction on which kinds of things you can include in your deck, adding that extra pip doesn't suddenly give you access to a lot of the cards that you'd think that you'd get access to. Like, it turns out Warpath's triple purity options only has like one ability, and the others are all characters that you wouldn't be able to play anyways because they're not insectoids. So that's enough about our conservative change. I really think that's a slam dunk. If you don't like these other ones, I really think that this one is just you could push that button today and it would make Swarmers much more exciting while still probably being horrible, but they'd be a little less horrible. Okay, so next we have our moderate change, and this is very, very similar to the conservative change. It's the same stat line mentioned. It is the same hybrid purity. The only thing I've added is one additional line of text, which is other insectoids you control have their morale cast set to 1. The reason for that is that the Swarmers have, across all of the Swarmers, they have 4 morale cost, which has been pointed out to me is because they are supposed to be uniform in mind. They are a hive mind. I think that, however, if the Swarmer Broodlord is alive, and the Swarmer Broodlord in the lore is supposed to be able to conquer the hordes of Swarmers and be the master of that hive mind, I think it makes sense that the insects dying would not affect your morale as much. So that is, I think, a flavor win. But the real reason behind this is that you are playing a faction of bugs. It is very jarring that you can only have 25 bugs die before you lose the game. It can happen quite regularly because your core unit is a 1-cost 3/3. So I think this would benefit the insectoids. This is a moderate kind of rework. It is definitely stronger than the conservative one, but I still think that it is appropriate, and it also helps fix one of the weaknesses Swarmers have, and it is a weakness that doesn't need to be there. They have so many weaknesses just from having to play bad cards that I don't think they also need to just randomly get hosed by morale more than other factions do, frankly. Okay, and before we move on here, I do also want to mention the wording on the cards I have changed from the original Broodlord. So the original Broodlord, just going to pull it up here, reads, if Swarmer Broodlord is your commander, you may only have insectoid characters in your deck. And then the change here is you may include any insectoids in your deck regardless of purity. That is a longer description than what Beck currently says, and Beck is very similar. Beck says, if Beck is your commander, ignore purity cost for dragons. That is much shorter, and text space is at a premium, so I changed the text on the Swarmer Broodlord to match the way Beck Dragon Tamer is written, which has the advantage of being shorter, but it also has the advantage of having a uniform use of language across cards to represent the same type of effect. Okay, moving on. Our last redesign for the Swarmer Broodlord, and this is the radical one. So keep in mind that this is taking Swarmer Broodlord and really pushing the limit of the identity of the card. It doesn't look like the current Swarmer Broodlord at all. The versions I just showed you, you might be thinking don't look much like the original version, but the radical version is really pushing the design space. And the push here is to acknowledge the fact that there isn't a proper commander for the Swarmer deck. If you play Swarmer Broodlord, it takes a command slot, and your other 2 command slots are going to be generic Swarmers. So you don't have, like, a lot of other kinds of decks have these absolutely game-defining sorts of commanders, like you have Alita, Immortal Tinkerer, or you have Kali. These commanders that impact the game from the command zone. It's part of what makes them special as commanders. The Swarmers also don't have a super big guy. Their highest cost guy is a 7 cost 7/7, which is the Overseer's Swarmer. So the opportunity here is, can we make... Oh, it's not even a 7/7, it's a 5/5. Whew. Yikes. Okay, while we're on this subject, just to talk about how weak the Swarmers are. I'm not saying that the Swarmers need to be as legitimate a faction as Overseers of Solace, which is a real faction, but, like, come on. All right. Anyways, so let's redesign the Swarmer Broodlord as an 8-cost character that does things from the command zone. And what I've come up with here is a Swarmer Broodlord that is an 8/20, because I really think that it having a huge amount of health, very durable, but not like an aggressive haymaker character, makes sense for it. It again has the restriction setting effect. It still has the insectoids you control have their morale cost set to 1, but I've also added pay 5, create a 3/3 insectoid in your assault zone, defense zone, and support zone. And for many of you, that effect is going to sound familiar because it is the same as... One second here. Skittering Tide. It's the same effect as Skittering Tide, but it's tied to the commander. You have to pay 2 extra to activate it. And the thought here is, I think that if you are playing commander where you can only play Swarmers, that isn't an insane effect to have. There's not that many ways you can abuse it, because you have such limited access to other things. And you might be thinking, well, this is too good. No, I have brought it in line with other exciting cool cards in the game instead of it being garbage. I think that a fair reference here is Volcano Class Carrier. Volcano Class Carrier lets you create 2 Flamed On Aspirants in front of your assault zone, which you're paying 5 and you're getting 2/3 of a Call to Crusade. Which, by the way, there was an alt art recently on sale, so if you're curious, that's what this is. So if you can get 2/3 a Call to Crusade at the cost of Call to Crusade by having that as your commander or having it in your support zone, I don't think it's crazy to be able to get a Skittering Tide at 2 resources more than it costs. And what's really cool about Skittering Tide is it's actually a pretty good card, and it's Insectoids theme. So I do think that the Swarmer Broodlord making a bunch of guys as a way to spend your extra resources makes sense. Okay, so that settles it. those are all of the redesigns I've come up with for Swarmer Broodlord. Again, with the focus being on making these ones that can be implemented more easily than a more dramatic kind of redesign, focusing on including effects that are already featured on other cards in some way, to make it so that if these changes were liked, they could be easily adopted from a coding perspective, and to provide you with a sequence of options that escalate in how dramatic the changes are, so that you can provide a preference on which of those you think is coolest. And of course, I know there are lots of people who have come up with their own redesigns, because this is a popular card to discuss. So, like, I know that a couple people in the Discord have been talking about that. Like, I saw that Smith of Lies had come up with a redesign that I thought was pretty neat, which was to have Swarmer Broodlord be a kind of a reference to... trying to remember, there's a sliver like that in Magic that did it. But anyways, a big top end synergy card, which was a Swarmer Broodlord or Brood Queen, 7 cost, and it has all of the effects of deployed insects you control, so you get to double down on those synergies. I don't know if that was intended to be a replacement for the Broodlord or just a card you could put in your deck, but I think there are a lot of people thinking about Swarmers. I think people want them to be cool, and I think if we're going to talk just for one more minute, one reason why you should care about making the Swarmers cool, and we're going to just take a second here, is because there are a pretty high number of cards that are tied to this one deck. And it's not just that Swarmer Broodlord is an unexciting kind of dead card. It's these other cards, with the exception of Genetic Splicing and Skittering Tide, largely you don't get to see them because they are so insanely hampered by this. So by buffing, reworking, changing Swarmer Broodlord, you might get to see not just Swarmer Broodlord, but these other like 10 or so cards get a little more play value out of them. And the hope is that the designs that I showcased are ones that require very little labor to implement, provided that I'm not entirely off base. Some people might think this design or these redesigns are crazy. All right. So we rambled for long enough. I hope you enjoyed this kind of video. Plan on making more of them in the future. I think most of them won't be nearly as dramatic as this one, but Swarmer Broodlord and the Swarmers are kind of exciting to me, and I like them, and I'd like to see them get a little more love. So I put a little more commentary here than you might with a more kind of vanilla card that has a little less reason to get excited about it. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you around.